I will. It's like Perek Yud Tes Pasuk Gimel. Okay, I wanna, because we didn't do much on Kedosim, and there are a few. I want to go through quite a few mitzvahs today, so we're going to do Parshas Kedosim. It's at page 656.
656, boys.
And tomorrow we'll start Emor. Okay, we had started Kedoshim to you. We spoke about last time about holiness. Just two very important announcements. Yeah, you're right in front of the camera. Okay, so last time we spoke about Kedoshim to you, and then it follows with Ichi Movaviv Tiro, Veshab Sosai Tishmoru. And you see over here it gives a command of honoring parents after telling a person to be holy and avoid immorality. Part of the idea is one of the commentaries says that if a person is ever caught up in a fit of doing something inappropriate, picture your parents. That's why I say picture your parents. What would your parents say about what you're doing right now? If nothing else, if nothing else works. So think about your parents. Number one. Number two. Just an interesting observation. When the commentaries all talk about this, when you honor your parents or your fear, here it's talk about Ishi Movaviv Tiro, which is generally in the Gemara when it says in the Ten Commandments, Kabed Esavich v'esimecha, honor them. Honor refers to what you should do for them, the positive commands, standing up for them, or feeding them, or clothing them. Ishi Movaviv Tiro refers to what you should not do. Don't do for your parents. Don't contradict them, and don't call them by their first name, and don't cause them any aggravation. But what's really interesting is if you take a look at take a look back in all the way in Parshas Toldos. Keep your finger on the place here. Turn to 27:31 in Bereshis. 27, remarkable insight from the Vilna Gaon. 27:31, which on page 138. Is that where it is? Oh yeah, okay. So this is when in the episode where Yitzchak gives the brachas to Yaakov and Esav. So first Yaakov comes in, and then Esav brings the food. Now Esav was known for his devotion to the mitzvah of honoring his father. That was Esav's big mitzvah. If you look at Pasuk 31, so it says, Vayaz gamhu matamim, this is after Yaakov has snuck out, on page, Pasuk 31, it's right in the middle of the page. Vayaz gamhu matamim, he also made delicacies. Vayove le'aviv, he brought it to his father. Now those two words together, Vayove le'aviv, he brought to his father, are what we call a palindrome. That means it reads backwards and forwards the same way. If you read it, let's start from and read it. Vayave la'aviv, he brought it to his father. And then if you look at the word la'aviv and you read it backwards and you break it up, it would also read as Vayave, Vav Yud Beis Aleph. And then the lamed goes with the next word, le'aviv, Vayave la'aviv. It reads backwards and forwards as he brought to his father. So the commentaries point out that when you honor your parents, what you do for your parents, you're going to get back. When are you going to get it back? And get it back from your kids. Right? Your kids, and they see you the way you treat your parents, that's how they're going to treat you. And it's alluded to over here in Vayave Lavi, Vayesav, who was honoring his father at this point, bringing him food. Vayave Lavi, Vayave goes back and forth. That's not why we do it. It's not why we do it, but at the end of the day, that's what the kids see is that's how they're going to regard their parents. Okay. Now, there are a bunch of mitzvahs here in Parsha Kedoshim, the Parsha, which may be the first or second most mitzvahs in the Torah. So I want to go through a few of these because there's obviously mitzvahs are things we should do. So if you take a look at Pasuk Tes, just two very important announcements. Number one, my brother called me up this morning. I'd come back from davening. My wife said to me, your brother called, it sounded important. So I called him back. It was extremely important. My brother called to let me know that the Pope, who is from Chicago, is officially a White Sox fan. I was so happy. I don't want him on my team. Right? Of course he's not going to be a Cub fan. I was thrilled. And of course my brother found that this was extremely important to tell me this at 8:30 in the morning when both of us are on our way to yeshiva. But listen, there are priorities in life. So the Pope is not one of mine. He is a White Sox fan. So for several reasons, he's not one of mine. Okay, in Pasuk Tes starts the harvesting laws, and it says like this. It's on page 658, 5 lines on the top. Uvekutzrechem es ketzir artzachem. When you harvest the harvest of your land, lo sechale pa'asad chaliktzor. Do not cut off the corner of the field. V'leket kitzir chalo selaket. Whatever drops, number one, you have to leave the corner of the field. That's called peah. Leave it for the poor people. Then when you're harvesting, see, there's a sickle and they harvest, and some of the grains would fall. I'm not going into the details of the halacha, but there would be a line of poor people following the harvesters, and what fell, there's a halacha. If a certain amount, if 2 grains fell, the owner or the harvesters are working for it are not allowed to pick it up. You have to leave it for the poor people. And then it says, your vineyard, also certain grapes that fall, and then there's also shikha. Shikha, which is when you forget, when they used to harvest wheat, what they do is first they cut it, then they would make it into bundles. Then they come back and get the bundles and bring it into the barn or bring it into the storage area. And there are halachas about if you forgot to take those bundles, you were collecting bundles, certain bundles you walked past and you forgot them. And again, I'm not going into the halachic details. You have to leave those bundles for the poor people. So there are what's called leket, shikha, and peah. These are the different things that you leave. This is before we even get to the tithing process. And what the Torah is doing over here is the Torah is making it an honorable way for poor people. That means when you go out to your field, you're a landowner. And there are a bunch of poor people who don't own land. Well, it's very, very embarrassing for a poor man to take handouts. Well, it's mine and I'm giving it to you. That's embarrassing. Here what the Torah does is it creates an honorable way for the poor man, because the poor man walks over to you one day and says, hey, Nick, when do we start harvesting the field? What do you mean we? And they say, listen, it's mine as much as yours. The Torah gave you certain parts, which is the field itself. The Torah gave me, I'm entitled to it. So it's not that you're doing me a favor, because the Torah gave it to me. And that becomes more honorable for the poor man, number one, that he's able to take, remember, we're talking about basic grains. I'll get to you one second. We're talking about basic grains to feed his family, number one. And number two, it turns us into givers. And when you're out there, it's not all for you. It's not all for me. I have to leave some for other people. I have to be thinking about other people. And obviously there are, and by the way, this is the story of Ruth that we're going to see on Shavuos. When Boaz noticed her, she was out in the field walking with a line of poor people waiting for the grains to drop. And then she bent down in a very sneeze way. The Megillah says, Boaz asked the people, who's that young lady over there? Even according to some opinions, she wasn't that young. He said, who's that girl? Who's that lady over there? And the Gemara says, Boaz looked at women? Hey, Boaz, the head of the Sanhedrin, he's checking out the girls? Oh, what's going on? Hey, who's that one over there? The Gemara says, what's Boaz doing asking about a girl? The Gemara says, she was so out of character for everybody else because poor people, and they're jumping on there's a pile of people, they're all jumping down to grab at the grains, yet she, very, very dainty. She bent down, made sure she was covered in tznius. She was, check the irony, she was eye-catchingly tznius. How's that? Right? It would be roughly the equivalent of a young lady. Don't eat sunflower seeds if possible. It would be the roughly equivalent of a young lady walking. Don't, if possible. Don't, because it makes noise and it's annoying, and it's not honorable for Torah. So it'd be roughly the equivalent of a young lady walking across a college campus like Florida State University in July wearing a full dress. Right? Who would you notice? The people walking around look like they couldn't afford clothing that you wouldn't notice, because that's what you'd expect. And also the young lady's walking with a dress on the campus. Everybody, whoa! You're not. It's not that you're gazing. You're just kind of surprised. That's what Boaz noticed. Boaz noticed that, hey, this is out of character, and that's why Boaz was asking about her. Nick, you had a question.
How does that work with maybe into like today's when people have like fences around their fields, land, like they just allow people to come onto their land?
I don't know what the halachas are today with agriculture. I think if I'm not mistaken, what they do is they actually harvest it and it's distributed without the people coming around, because most people are not walking around collecting it. Or the other answer is that the first of all, you're not allowed to block off your field. There are certain times that they have to allow them in. I think also that the halacha is that past a certain point, if they're no longer collecting it, you're allowed to take it. But I really don't know what's done today. I'm going to try to find out what practically is done. Most people are not going into your field to go cut down a few, to gather up a few grains of.
Doesn't harvesting it for them to take it to a center for them to collect, doesn't that almost defeat the purpose of?
But otherwise they're not going to come. So I have to find out what practically is done nowadays. In any event, that's now. Look at the very next mitzvah. The very next pasuk says, "Lo tignovu," don't steal. V'lo sechachashu v'lo sechakru ish ba'amito. Don't steal. Don't deny, and don't lie to each other. Now, in the Ten Commandments, it says "Lo signov." But that's not talking about stealing money. That's talking about kidnapping, which is a capital offense. That's a capital offense. Here we're talking about lo tignovu, don't steal money. Now there's no accident that the Torah writes it right after this pasuk about the agriculture. Because you're a farmer and you're looking around and got a bunch of people, some of them look pretty healthy, and you're thinking, hey, get a job, man. What I got to work my field, and now you freeloaders are going to come through here, and you may rationalize how not to leave it for the poor people, which is a temptation. We're talking about money, talking about cash, talking about the wheat is worth something. So the Torah immediately follows it with lo tignovu, don't steal, because we know that this is an area where somebody may be vulnerable. I did all the work, and now you guys are come marching through my field. And so a person may feel, I don't want to, I'll figure out, well, they didn't really fall, they kind of just dropped, or whatever your rationalization is. And therefore the Torah, realizing that people are people, the Torah, the Meforshim say, that's why it follows over here with lo tignovu. Okay. Now, take a look at Pasuk Yud Dalet, Perik Yud Tes Pasuk. I'm going to move kind of fast, because I'm going to cover a few of these mitzvahs here. On page 660, 2 lines from the top. So it says, Lo sekal el cheresh, don't curse a deaf person. V'lifnei iver lo sitein michshol, and don't put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. V'yaresa me'elokecha ani Hashem. Now, don't curse a deaf person. So take a look at Rashi. Lo sekal el cheresh, the right column of Rashi, 6 lines from the top. Ein li el cheresh. Right column, 6 lines from the top on page 660. Ein li el cheresh. I only know you shouldn't curse a deaf person. Minayin l'rabos kol adam. How do we know to include everybody? Talmud lomar be'amcha lo so'or. Shouldn't curse anybody. There's another pasuk. Im kein lama nere cheresh. Why does it say don't curse a deaf person? Ma cheresh miyuchad shehu b'chayim. Af kol shehu b'chayim. So anybody who's alive, Yotza Hames she'enoch b'chayim. A dead person, the same prohibition does not apply. He's no longer alive. Not nice to curse a dead person, but it's not the same prohibition. Then it says, don't put a stumbling block in front of a blind man. Now, let me ask you a question. In front of a living person, you could? Yeah, he's a blind man. It's really not nice. Number one, well, he's a blind man. We won't try to trip him. But if you're a living person, we could cause you to stumble. If you're a person who can see. Doesn't make sense, number one. Number two, how many people are low enough to go trip a blind man? How many people are low enough to trip a blind man walking around? No class at all. Even in prisons, they have a code of behavior in prisons. If you're a murderer, an armed robber, or a violent criminal, okay. But if they throw in a guy who's done certain things, like being a cannibal or other things, they don't tolerate that in prison. Hey, we're fine upstanding criminals here. What are you throwing in this low life? And they know that, and there's a certain code in a prison of certain crimes that you don't commit, like you don't do things. It's one thing if you do it to a woman who could see. There was a case once of a guy who violated a woman who was blind. They ripped him apart in prison. What kind of business is this? Where you got no class at all? So the Torah says over here, don't trip. Wait, you're going to get tripped. Who's going to trip a blind man? Yeah, anybody's going to trip a blind man. So what does it mean? What does it mean? Two ideas here. Idea number one is somebody who is blind in a certain area, don't give him bad advice. In other words, advice that will be beneficial to you. A guy comes over, he says, listen, somebody suggested a shidduch for me. The girl is wonderful, gorgeous, and she's the single daughter of a 91-year-old billionaire who's on a respirator. Do you think that would be a good shidduch for me? Nah, that's not for you. You know, that's you know, you're on too high a spiritual level to go for that. The next thing you know, he's engaged to her, right? That's what it means. If they iver lo sitein michshol. Guy says to you, well, I found a 12-room home right in the middle of Manhattan, which is being sold for $100,000. You think I should buy it? Nah, you know, Manhattan, you know, a lot of traffic, not good. And the next day you buy it, right? Because it's very good. That's what it means. If they either don't give bad advice. And the rule, and gentlemen, when it comes to giving advice, is make sure you're qualified. You know, one of the most flattering things in the world is somebody comes to ask you advice. It's very flattering. And one of the biggest mistakes people make is asking unqualified people. And the third mistake is unqualified people offering advice. When you get married, for sure people who are unqualified will be giving you advice, and much of it is poor advice. And one of the worst pieces of advice you'll get when you're married is usually comes from an uncle or a great uncle who's probably divorced twice. And he'll pull you aside and say, hey kid, you listen to me, kid. You listen to me. You're never gonna sleep upset with each other, kid. You always work it out before you go to sleep, which is very well-meaning advice. Is one of the worst pieces of advice somebody's gonna give you. Somebody will tell you that before you get married, I can almost guarantee you. And it's a very bad piece of advice, because if you're upset with each other, the best thing you can do is go to sleep. Just go to sleep. You know, listen, we're both tired, we're cranky, you know, just go to sleep. We'll work it out in the morning, which I told you means the husband then apologizes. But if you're, and when you, what takes it, what could be a 2-hour slugfest at night, verbal slugfest, I mean, I don't mean physically, unless your wife hits you. But a verbal slugfest at night. In the morning, you're fresh, you wake up, sun is shining, you work it out in 10 minutes, give her the money, and finish. It's all Shalom Al Yisrael. That's number one. So if they don't give advice if you're not qualified, if somebody had a medical issue, you wouldn't think of giving them advice. You know that in a medical issue, you're not qualified. I'm not qualified. The best advice we give to somebody who has a medical problem is go talk to a doctor. That's the best advice you can give somebody. When it comes to an area you've got expertise, if you've graduated engineering school and somebody's asking you about their home or something else, and you're qualified, so give advice. If you're a dentist, give somebody advice about their teeth. But if you're not qualified, so the best thing you can do is say to people, I am not qualified to advise you. Go to somebody who can advise you. I heard about a guy who's a lawyer. And every time, he doesn't like going to parties with his wife. His wife said, was talking to her friend. She says, you know, every time we go to a party, people are constantly coming over to him and asking him legal advice. You know, he doesn't like going because the whole evening, what is your husband doing? Your husband a doctor? Don't people ask him medical questions? She says, yeah, but my husband takes care of it right away. Because as soon as somebody asks him a question, he says, take off your clothes. So nobody bothers him anymore at parties, because that's what doctors. So you know, people, are you qualified or you're not qualified? Are you qualified or you're not qualified? So if you're not qualified, just say I'm not qualified to give advice. Number one. Number two, if the iver lo sitein michshol means to not put a spiritual stumbling block in front of somebody, which means, let's say you have a friend and you know that he's on his way to becoming frum, but he's not fully committed. And one day he sits down and says, boy, am I starved. I haven't eaten in 9 hours. You know, I was on, and you happen to have a non-kosher cheeseburger in your pocket, and you put it down in front of him. That's called lifnei iver lo sitein michshol. You're putting a stumbling block in front of a blind person. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was asked if lighting somebody's cigarette is putting a stumbling block in front of a blind person. Somebody's got a cigarette, can you light it? Is that considered a stumbling block? Now, first of all, the question is based on an assumption that smoking is usur, which it isn't. It's not a good idea, and one shouldn't smoke, and one shouldn't start smoking, but by the letter of the law, smoking is not usur. It's a very bad idea to smoke, and if I was in a cab driver told me that he and his wife used to smoke, and I'm talking about cigarettes. He and his wife used to smoke, and one day they both decided to stop smoking together. Every single day they took 70 shekels, which is what they spent on cigarettes, and they put it aside, 70 shekels. Every 6 months they took the money and they made a trip. They traveled somewhere. He told me they've been doing it for 15 years. They've basically been to every country in the world on cigarette money, right? Isn't that amazing? It was amazing. The guy told me that. The guy said, what do you call it? He said, they've been here, they've been there, you name it, they've been there. And all on cigarette money because they stopped smoking. So somebody once said, my son told me, a guy walks over to his friend, he says, you smoke, huh? Yeah. You see this building across the street? How long have you been smoking? He said, about 30 years. Make a calculation. In 30 years on cigarette money, you could have bought this building. The guy turns to him, he goes, do you smoke? He goes, no. Do you own the building? He goes, no. He goes, well, I do. I heard about a guy who said, I was smoking. I smoked. And one day I read that smoking is bad for your health. So I immediately quit reading. There are different ways to handle things in life. It isn't usher to smoke, but Rav Moshe Feinstein was asked, is it? He said, no, it's not. You're not guilty of lifnei iver lo sitein michshol, because he could obviously get a cigarette lit by somebody else, number one, and number two, for technical reasons, cigarette smoking is not. Again, all poskim agree it's not a good idea to smoke, and you shouldn't start smoking, and so on and so forth. But none of the major poskim have come out and said it is outright usher. You can't, it's a blanket usher. It's certainly not a good idea. Another example of lifnei iver lo sitein michshol would be to invite your friend to your house on Shabbos where you know he's going to drive. That's lifnei iver. You know he's going to drive. That's lifnei iver lo sitein michshol. So with the idea of creating a stumbling block for somebody, which means you have to gauge how weak they are in a certain area or whatever the case is, that's a prohibition of lifnei iver lo sitein michshol. Okay. Take a look at Pasuk Tezvav. Lo sasu avil b'mishpat. Do not. How does he translate avil exactly? Do not commit a perversion of justice. Lo sisa pnei dal. Do not. You, a judge, if you have a poor man in front of you, don't rule in his favor simply because he's poor, if that's not justice. V'lo sedar pnei gadol, and don't honor a wealthy, prominent person. Let's say there's a prominent person. Gemara gives the example. There's a poor man in court and a rich man in court. So what I'll do, or a prominent individual. So Gemara gives two possibilities. One is I'll rule in favor of the poor man. Again, I'll do him a favor because anyway the rich man's got money. Or I'll rule in favor of the prominent man because I don't want to embarrass him, and then I'll reimburse the poor guy outside of court. The Gemara says don't do either of those. Dovid HaMelech would call it the way he saw it, and sometimes would rule against a poor man, but then he himself would reimburse the poor man outside of court. That's tzedakah, and that's chesed and mishpat. He did the letter of the law because you don't have a right to distort the law. On the other hand, after the poor man without the money, then Dovid HaMelech would reimburse it. Okay, now then it says b'tzedek tishpat amisecha. B'tzedek tishpat amisecha is the law that you have to judge people favorably. You have to give people the benefit of the doubt. Now this one is a tricky one. Excuse me 1 second. What that means is like this. You drive past the McDonald's and you see a guy sitting in a McDonald's chowing down on a cheeseburger. Guy you know from the community. Now, he's wearing a yarmulke and may have a beard, may have payas, and he may be wearing tzitzis and a talus, and he's eating in a McDonald's. Now, what do you assume about this guy? So the answer to that is it depends who he is. If he's a guy who you know is a sinner, who has no regard for halacha at all, then you call it the way you see it. He's in a McDonald's and he's eating treif, and he knows that he's eating treif, and he's a sinner. If he's a tzaddik, so then you have to give the benefit of the doubt. Now, how do you give a tzaddik the benefit of the doubt? He's sitting in a McDonald's. Well, either he had a sudden ulcer attack in his life-threatening situation. He had to get the first get to the food, the nearest food he could get, or he's suffering from amnesia. He doesn't know where he is, or he saw the big M outside McDonald's and he thought it stands for Mahadran, right? Or anything else that you could come up with to give him the benefit of the doubt. And the way the Chafetz Chaim puts it is, now, what if he's a middle-of-the-road guy? Let's say he's, your average happy-go-lucky Jew who's, he's generally halachically conscientious, but the guy that he's got his moments of weakness. He's a guy. Right? What do you do in that situation? Then the halacha says it is meritorious to give him the benefit of the doubt, but if you call it the way you see it, because that's more logical, that's okay too. But it's certainly meritorious to give him the benefit of the doubt, to try to find. Now, the approach here, the Chafetz Chaim says, how do you give somebody the benefit of the doubt? There are a lot of situations like, you come home and supper's not ready again. You got to give your wife the benefit of the doubt, which is an important thing in marriage. Give them the benefit of the doubt. What could have happened? Well, maybe she ran out to do a chesed. Maybe she wasn't feeling well. She took a nap in the afternoon. She slept a little longer than she should. Maybe you didn't give her enough money so she could buy food for supper. Men are very unreasonable. We don't like giving our wives money, but we expect that there should be stuff in the house. It's not easy living with a man. I think that's one of the reasons we say Shelo Asani Isha. The bracha. I wouldn't want to be married to a man, right? Men are pretty impetuous and men are pretty unreasonable. A woman's got to go through that grief. I don't know. Maybe, what do you call it? It's not such a great thing. I always tell guys when you get married, it's a good idea one day, go look in a mirror. You can do without the mirror too. Ask yourself at some point, like you've married 5 years, 10 years, 30 days, I don't care how long. Ask yourself as a man, how would I like to be married to me? With my bad moods and my stinginess and my unreasonable demands, how would I like to be married to me? Now think about what your wife is going through. Right? That's a very sobering thought. So the Chafetz Chaim says, imagine you lost, and this has happened to you at some point in life, you can't find your wallet. Where do you look? In every single, even illogical place you can imagine. You look in the attic, even though you don't even have an attic, and you look at you look at a pair of pants that you haven't worn in 17 years, and you look in drawers, and you look everywhere, right? You look even what's that? In the fridge, everywhere. Looking for cold cash, huh? You look everywhere in order that's illogical. Why do you do that? By the way, people hide monies in fridges and freezers. Oh, it was an interesting halachic shaila. There was a guy, oh, you're going to love this. There were two guys, true story, documented incident. There are two guys. So Ruvain is leaving town for a week. And he says to his friend Shimon, documented halachic question. He says to his friend Shimon, if you want, you could stay in my house for free. I'm leaving for a week. And Shimon says, great. And he stays in Ruvain's house, and he has food accessible, and he decides to do Ruvain a favor and save him some electricity. So he unplugs the refrigerator because he's not going to be using the refrigerator. Okay. After a couple of days, he smells something unpleasant, and he realizes he forgot that there's also a freezer. So he opens up the freezer. There are 10 frozen chickens in there, which are no longer they're now rotten. And he takes these chickens and he throws them out. Okay. Ruvain comes back after a week and he says, listen, I messed up your chickens. I owe you $200 for your chickens. He says, why? He says, well, I unplugged the freezer and I dumped them. He said, you dumped the chickens? He said, yeah. I can't believe you dumped. I had $10,000 cash hidden in one of those frozen chickens. And he believed him. It wasn't the guy trying to make their friends. He believed him, and they went to as a halachic shayla. Does he have to reimburse him for the $10,000 or not? What do you say, Benny? And you thought that halachic authorities are simply asked, what do you do when you forget Yalav Yavo, huh? How would you like to paskin this one? Yeah. So what? And he believed him. It wasn't that he didn't believe him. But do I have to pay? What's the halacha? So the posek said, since you couldn't have possibly anticipated that somebody put money in a frozen chicken, that's a no. You're not responsible for the cash. The chickens you do have to pay for because that's a pshia. To unplug a refrigerator, that's a pshia. That's an act of negligence. But, so you owe him the $200 for the chicken, But you could deduct the 37 cents that you saved them on the electricity by unplugging the refrigerator. We go down to the nth detail over here. I doubt that they remained such good friends after that. 10,000. So things could happen. So you have to try to look even in illogical places. There's an unbelievable story. Did you ever hear the Chassam Sofer? The Chassam Sofer was one of the big poskim, and then his son, the Ksav Sofer, he was in Pressburg. And then his son became the Ksav Sofer, became the Rov of Pressburg. He was the Gadol Ador. Chassam Sofer was the Gadol Ador of his generation, and the Ksav Sofer was one of the Gadol Ador in his generation. We're going back about, what are we? We're going into the late 1800s, mid to late 1800s. And the Ksav Sofer is a little bit left. So there was a rabbinic convention in Pressburg, where the Ksav Sofer was. There was a rabbinic convention. They were there for a meeting, and he had all these. He got dozens of rabbanim who came from all over to be at this meeting. They served a very, very fine dinner, and at the dinner, the Ksav Sofer got up, and he said, "I have in my hands a half shekel coin, the machatzis shekel coin, the only existing machatzis shekel coin from the time of the Beis Hamikdash." And everybody, wow. And he handed it around, and everybody was looking at it. They went around the room. And at a certain point, the Ksav Sofer said, turned to the guy and said, "Do you have the coin?" He says, "No, I don't have the coin." I gave the coin. They didn't know where the coin was. So, Hamachatzisa shekel coin, the only one in existence. So one of the Rabbanim said, "Listen, we're all Rabbanim, but we're also human. I think everybody should just get up and empty out their pockets." And one old Rav said, no, bad idea. So everybody looked at it and says, "Maybe we'll start with you." Right? And the Ksav Sofer says, no, we're not putting anybody on the spot. Let's look for it. And they look around, and everybody says, "Hey, listen, let's empty some pockets." And finally this old Rav says, "Listen, if you don't find the coin in 10 minutes, then I'll be glad we'll empty our pockets. I'll be the first one to do it." And so they start searching, and all of a sudden some kid from the kitchen says, "I found the coin. It was accidentally scraped off one of the plates, went into a garbage pail, and here's the coin." And he gives back the coin to the Ksav Sofer. So they turned to the old man, and they said, "Well, why were you so adamantly opposed to emptying out your pockets?" He says, "Okay, listen, I have no choice." He reaches into his pocket, and he pulls out, he said, "I too have a machatzis shekel coin from the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. And I saw that the Ksav Sofer was so proud of it, I didn't want to steal his thunder. But I also realized that if his coin went lost after he said it's the only existing coin, and I would pull mine out of my pocket, who would have believed me that was the coin, that wasn't his coin?" And then he turned to the boy, the 16-year-old boy who dived into the garbage in the kitchen, and he said, "Because you saved me the embarrassment, I give you a bracha that you should have longevity." And I think the end of the story was the kid lived to 100, something like that. So who would have thought giving him the benefit of the doubt? It's a very difficult thing. To give somebody the benefit of a doubt but the Gemara says, if you give people the benefit of the doubt, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us the benefit of the doubt too. Now, that begs a question. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have any doubt. He knows exactly what our motivation is, and he knows exactly what we did. So how do you reconcile that? Well, if you give people the benefit of the doubt, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give you the benefit of the doubt. So I heard a phenomenal explanation. Imagine a guy, after 120 years, he goes up to Shemaim, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, here's your ledger. And then, as they're reviewing his behavior, Kodesh Baruch Hu says, "Hey, I got you down over there. You left davening pretty early. You left right after Chazor Hashatz, you booked out a shul. What's up with that?" The guy says, "Well, I had to, my wife wasn't feeling well. I had to get home to help with the kids." He says, "Yeah, but everybody else in the shul saw you. They thought you were just running out of the shul." So the guy says, "Yeah, well, they should have given me the benefit of the doubt." So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, "Did you give people the benefit of the doubt? If you gave people the benefit of the doubt, then you could demand that of other people. But if you were a guy who never gave benefit of the doubt, even if you had a justified reason, but now you're responsible for them, if anybody learned from your actions and said, well, if he could leave shul early, I could leave shul early too." So if you give the benefit of the doubt, so to speak, you activate some sort of divine mercy, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us the benefit of the doubt as well. That's what and there are countless stories in the Gemara. Okay, I don't want to go into it too long because I want a few more points here, but that's basically the idea. Okay, take a look at Pasuk Tes Zayin. Lo selech Rachel ba'amecha, you should not go about as a talebearer, a gossip monger. And it's called a Rachel because Rachel was a peddler. Rachel was generally a guy who was peddling women's implements, cosmetics and perfumes and that sort of thing. And by the way, when Ezra led the reestablishment of Israel after the Babylonian exile, he instituted 10 rulings that Ezra made. The Jews are coming back from Babylonia and they're taking over Eretz Yisrael. One of the decrees of Ezra is that you cannot stop a woman's cosmetic merchant from coming to town to peddle his wares. That means even if the guy's in town, you got some cosmetics shops, Estee Lauder and all these other whatever they're called, and a guy comes to town, you couldn't stop him from coming down. That's how vital women's cosmetics were. And though Ezra made that as a takana when the Jewish people came back, that a Rachel. Now a Rachel is somebody who goes peddling his wares. A gossip monger is somebody who goes peddling their wares. They go from place to place, gossiping today. All you got to do is push a couple of buttons on your computer, and you could gossip and rip up the entire world's reputation. But in the old days, you went around, you went to one house to hear the news, then you went to the other house, then you went to somewhere else, and you were a peddler. So first it says, Lo selech Rachel ba'amecha, Lo samod al dam re'echa, do not stand on your fellow's blood, ani Hashem. Now what does it mean, not to stand on your fellow's blood? So the Gemara says, if you see your fellow Jew is in a life-threatening situation and you can save him, then you have an obligation to try to save him. Now, the guidelines here are, if somebody is in a life-threatening situation and you know for a fact that by trying to save him you will die, then you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to give up your life for somebody else to save somebody else's life. There was a question that was asked in the Holocaust a number of times where a father knew that his son would be executed the next day, and he also knew that if he bribes the Nazi, he could switch places with his son. And that shaila was asked a number of times in the Holocaust, and the halacha is unequivocally, no, you cannot. A father cannot switch places with his son. Every father in the world would do so, but the halacha says you cannot. Number one, I'll get to you in 1 second. You cannot. Number one. Number two, let's say somebody's drowning, swirling water, and you do not have life-saving training. What's it called? You haven't been trained as what they call lifeguards, SLS, what they used to call it, senior life saving, SLS. CPR. CPR is something else. But you have not been trained to swim, to save people in the water. Jumping into the water to save somebody who's drowning just means you're both going to drown. There's no way you're going to save him. If you have a stick that you could extend to him, or you have something else to get him out of the water, then you're obligated to do so. If you know for a fact that a person knows for a fact they're going to die trying to save someone else, then they're not allowed to do so. On the other hand, if there's even a chance you'll save him, then you're obligated to do so. Why? The logic of the halach is because you're a safek and he's a vadai. You are only a doubt. He is a sure thing he's going to die, so you have to take the risk. Now, this is the only time I know of halacha, in halacha anywhere, where the halacha says in such a situation, those are the guidelines, but don't think about it too much. The only time I know halacha says that. Don't think about it too much, because if you start thinking about it, you're never going to try to save anybody. So I don't know exactly where that line is. We had in our neighborhood, there was a woman was in a shul, she was at a shir. And the shir, she could see her home, her flat from the shul, and all of a sudden she sees black smoke billowing out of her apartment. Or there was a fire. So she goes running out in a panic. And what happened was, they tried to have a family of 10 kids, and they're trying to get everybody accounted for. One of the kids a 10-year-old son wasn't accounted for. There was a guy, a former Israeli soldier who had been at the raid on Entebbe. He was one of the Israeli commandos, and he was there. And she asked him if he could go in and see if he could find something. He said he can't risk his life for that. And then there was another guy who looked like Woody Allen with a haircut. and he immediately took a blanket, put a blanket over his head, and he ran into the fire, into the house, and he just started groping around randomly, and happened to hit a bed where this kid was taking his Shabbos nap. So he managed to get the kid out of the house. So he saved the kid. Okay, now that's a classic situation when there's a fire. Do you go in or you don't go in? Is it a sure thing or not? If you gauge that it's a sure thing, then you do not go in. If it's not a sure thing, the halacha says you should, and then the halacha says don't think about it too much. That's what the halacha says. Number one. Number two, on a spiritual level, if you see that fellow Jew, you can save him spiritually, so don't let him die spiritually. But that's only if you have some sort of influence. Sometimes by trying to save people spiritually, you just push them further away. Nobody likes to be told what to do, especially by religious fanatics like ourselves. So you have to be very, very careful to make sure to do it only at a time when it's done tactfully and so on and so forth. That's what's included. Somebody had a question. Yeah, Benny, go ahead.
If we're saying that you are able to risk your physical body to save another Jew, can you then also
No.
risk?
Absolutely not. You hear what his question is? Can you raise your excellent question, Vinny? If you do have to risk your physical body, are you allowed to risk your spiritual level to save people? No. The answer is that when it comes to kiruv, we don't risk it because we do not allow, and that's why there are it's very often a question before somebody gets involved in outreach, going to college campuses or going to places where his spiritual level is seriously at risk, then a person has to get what we call das Torah. You have to go to a big Talmud Chacham to find out if this is something you should get involved with, because it's not worth. And what we've seen with experience, that's why the kiruv that's done, for the most part, we don't go and drop ourselves down in a secular neighborhood and live there. We live in these religious enclaves, and from there, from a position of strength, we then strike out. I'll go to any university, I'll go to any kibbutz to give a lecture. I'm not going to go live on a university campus. I'm not going to go live on a kibbutz, on a secular. To talk to the people, to try to get, yes, but there are very, very, very clear, there are very, very different guidelines for different people depending on who they are. Have you ever heard of the disco rabbi?
Yeah.
Rabbi Grossman? This is a guy came from Mea Sharim. He looks as much like a Yerushalmer with the shtreimel and the payas, and he went to a place called Migdal HaEmek, which is in Nowheresville, Israel, one of the biggest crime areas and he went up there to see maybe there's some work he could do for outreach. And when he got there, this is a guy from Mea Sharim. When he got there, he wanted to know where the local yeshiva is. So they said there is no yeshiva here. They said, where would I find the youth? They said, in the disco. So he stopped the next guy and he says, where is Yeshivat Disco? And all of a sudden this guy walked, they told him where it was, and he went in, and he's in a disco. And here he is with the shtreimel, and everything came to a grinding halt as soon as it's like, if Batman would come walking into this room right now, we would stop right now. Like Batman's here. What is Batman doing here? It would be if Michael Jordan walked into the room, like, hey, whoa, like a dream come true. All of a sudden this guy comes in like an apparition, and he turned over the entire town. But he is a very special person who was never affected by it spiritually. His level was never respected, and he had a Rabbi who told him he should be doing it. It's a very, very risky thing, and it's not clear where that line is. I knew a kid who went off in Yiddishkeit, a kid who was off the derech. And one day his parents said that his father said to him, his father was very involved in Jewish outreach. And he said, his father one day said to him, what happened? A kid was a teenager, right? He said, what happened? Was it something that went wrong in school? Was it something we did wrong? He said, no. He said, school was fine, everything was fine. He said, so what got you off? He said, Dad, it's the girls you invited into the house. And a person has to know, even if you bring in people into the house, what about your own children? What's the effect? I had a group of guys here once at Ohr Somayach, years ago, my Gemara here. It looked like a theme from a TV show. There were 7 guys who all looked like hippies, and one guy who looked like he would be an accountant. right? And I invited him to the house. Now, one of the guys had long, flaming red hair. He didn't drink wine and he didn't cut his hair, and there was some concern he might be a Nazir. And I brought these guys, I invited these guys over to the house for I think it was a Hanukkah party. They came in, each one had a musical instrument, and they come walking into the house. My kids were very young at the time. I remember kids are standing against the wall looking at them like this. And then my son, my impressionable 9-year-old son, he looks at me and says, "Daddy?" He's looking at the guy with the long red hair and says, "Daddy, is that a shaitel?" Right? So you have to realize the kids are seeing everything. Now, if you're the type of parents and you have kids in your house that are, they understand, they see what you're doing, and they see what's going on in the home, it's one thing. But you have to understand there is an influence. People come into the house, maybe they talk about things that you don't want your kids to hear about, maybe they use language, a lot of things. And therefore, it's not a simple question. The basic answer is we do not risk our level. We have to know that it's not a risk on a spiritual level. That's the rule. Good question. Okay, one last point very quickly. In Pasuk Yud Ches, it says, "Lo sikom velo sitor es b'nei amecha," do not take revenge and do not bear a grudge. Bottom of page 660, last line. "Lo sikom velo sitor es b'nei amecha ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha." You must love your fellow man as yourself, ani Hashem. When it comes to revenge, Rashi points out over here there are two things. Revenge means I walk over to your house to borrow your shovel. You say no. Then the next day you come over to ask me to borrow my drill. And I say, no, you didn't lend me your shovel. I'm not lending you my drill. That's revenge. Bearing a grudge means the same scenario, but the next day when you come to borrow my drill, I say, yeah, you can borrow my drill. I'm not like you who doesn't lend things out. That means you're bearing a grudge. In neither one, you have to get it out of your heart completely. You have to not even think about what he did or what he didn't do. You have to get it out. I told you I once flicked my brother, and he chased me and had me cornered and he had his fist up. I flicked him. He was eating an orange. I gave him a good flick on the ear. His ear needed flicking. And he had me cornered, and I decided to appeal to his religious sensitivity. So I said to him, you can't hit me. He said, why not? I said, it's revenge. So he looked at me for a second. He goes, it's not revenge. I'm starting from new. Then he proceeded to pound me. And by the way, it is revenge. By any other name, it's revenge. Why can't you take revenge? Why not? The basic answer is that when you take revenge, what you're doing is you're making a statement. The cause is you, as opposed to the cause being Hashem. And the attitude is supposed to be, you're not the cause, you're simply the agent. And if it wouldn't be you, it would have been somebody else. And therefore, by taking revenge, instead of focusing on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, why did I go through this aggravation? I'm focusing on the human being as the cause. And the human being is not the cause. Now, halacha does allow that if somebody costs you money, the halacha says you can take him to Beis Din to get recompensation. That's not revenge, that's compensation, because that's also built into it. But if somebody cuts you off in traffic, or if somebody takes your parking space, and so the next day you take his parking space, so that means you're saying, he is the guy who aggravated me. I said, no, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said yesterday, I want you to have the aggravation of not having your parking space. And if it wouldn't be your parking space, so it would be your wallet would have gone missing. Something would have aggravated you, and think about why HaKadosh Baruch Hu is causing you aggravation as opposed to taking it out on people. That's why revenge is prohibited. Okay, tomorrow we'll start Parsha Zemor.